guys, welcome back to Magic TV. My name's Craig and it is 9 o'clock, which means it's time for a Talk Magic where I interview my favorite magicians, some of the best magicians on the planet. And today I've got a gentleman with me who I have talked about over and over again, a massive inspiration on my career, one of my favorite creators and performers of magic, the super talented Dave Jones. How you doing, mate?
Hello, Craig. How you doing?
I'm so, you know what? I'm really excited that you found the time to come on the channel, because you know how much I respect you.
I've got a fair bit of time at the moment, funnily enough.
I think we all have, haven't we?
Yes, I know. Yeah. No, nice to speak to you. Thanks for the nice introduction as well. Yeah.
No, it's true. You know, I've known you for a long time, and when I first got into magic, there were certain people that you kind of look. I remember going to a convention very early on, and you were kind of there in the distance, and somebody said to me, "That's Dave Jones." I was like, "Oh my gosh, Dave Jones, Dave Jones, Dave Jones." Oh my God. I just watched your videotape. I'd watched a lot of stuff from International. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this guy's amazing." I've been doing all of your material. I even do all of your jokes now. Like I do, you know, that whole one when you make a mistake. Oh well, you know that everyone makes a mistake. Said the Dalek climbing off the dustbin.
Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah,
I've literally stolen your act over the years, and I remember not having the balls to go up to you, and because I was so nervous about like saying, "Hi, I'm Craig." And when I actually met you, you were such a nice guy, and you're so knowledgeable.
It's an act.
You do it very well. You're so knowledgeable, but you're so free with your information, and you're so free at helping people out. And what I also like about you, and we'll get to this down the line, is that you don't mind being outspoken. You know, and I appreciate that quality in somebody. You don't mind saying.
I'm old enough and ugly enough to give a real view these days. You know, a lot of people blowing smoke just to try and advance their career. You know, I think I've got where I'm going, so I can afford to relax a bit now, I think.
Absolutely. Now, for those people that don't know about you, let's start at the very beginning, because you've been in magic for a very long time. When did you first, is your sort of origin story the same as everyone else's? You bought a magic set when you were 5 years old, and or is there
more or less?
Yeah.
I mean, I can remember the book I bought. It was a little book when I was at school. We used to have a book club, and we're talking primary school here, so I was about 8. And every month we'd have a small catalogue handed out, and we'd choose a book or two from it. And then we'd our parents would buy these books. And I chose this book one day called Spooky Tricks. And it was a book aimed at children. Scholastic Book Services, still out there. I checked it on eBay the other day. I'm tempted to buy another copy just for old time's sake, you know. And the conceit of this book was basically it was a ghost teaching tricks. And the tricks were all aimed at, you know, they were on the spooky end of things. So they'd be like horror tricks, well, you know, kids' horror. You remember the old trick with a matchbox and you'd rig a hole in it and you could put your finger through the hole and wrap it up in cotton wool and put some red ink on it. And it looked like you had a severed finger in a box. That sort of thing it was, you know. But I tell you what was interesting about that trick. It gave away the secret of a thing called the Victory Carton illusion, which is the double box illusion, which is made from cardboard boxes, UF Grant, Gene Grant's. And that was in there to produce somebody from, I think you produced your sister dressed as a witch or something. Yeah. And that was where I got into it, 8 years old, you know. So that was my first record. I was about 8 years old. And
did that interest continue, or did like you find girls and you stepped away and came back? Or
no, I mean that's my earliest memories of doing. Another very early memory was David Nixon was on the TV one day, did the Gazinta boxes. I remember turning to my dad and saying, how can that be? How could you, the Gazinta box effect, for those that don't know, it is you have a red box, you open it up, and inside there's a blue box, a smaller blue box. You take the blue box out, and then you close back the red box up and you put that inside the blue box. So in other words, the bigger box has gone into the smaller box. And I remember even at 9 or 10 years old thinking, that's totally impossible. You know, that it was beyond the realms of a trick. It was almost to me like that can't happen. That's the smaller box. How can a bigger box go into a smaller box? It was almost like science to me in a way, you know. I remember that, and me, of course, Dad hadn't got a clue how it was done, you know. And then I got a Merit. Merit was a company that used to make chemistry sets. That's how they made their, which are probably all banned now, full of chemicals that are, you probably health and safety wouldn't allow these days. But Merit did a box of Magic. And I bought a Merit, and it was the usual thing, you know, the penetration frame, a small set of cups and balls, a set of 3 plastic linking rings, you know, and the, you know, the Buddha papers and everything like that was in it, you know, and that's the usual sort of start, really, you know. I mean, I was saying the other day in another interview that I think one of the big dangers for kids getting into magic these days is they don't start off gently, if you see what I mean. You know, they like magic, they see magic on the telly, so they go straight to YouTube, type in magic, and the first thing they'll see is Ben Earl doing a Pharaoh shuffle routine. And, you know, and whereas with me, it was a gentle, like my generation, it was a gentle start. We'd all start off with something like a book that was aimed at the public, then we'd buy a magic set, and then somehow or other we'd progress to sort of slightly better things, you know, and there was a gentle progression, whereas now you're just thrown straight into it, you know, as a...
I remember my first book was Adult Magic by Paul Daniels.
Yeah, which is a sort of biography stroke magic tricks about Daniels, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Nicely done, colour. One of my favourite books was a thing called How to Be a Conjurer by Robert Harbin. It was originally published as How to Be a Magician. Why they felt the need to change the title, I don't know, but originally it was How to Be a Magician, and it was reproduced as How to Be a Conjurer, and that was great because it had everything in it you could make yourself, from shoe boxes, and so there was that DIY. It was like a Son's Minds trick well before its day, you know. You had to make everything in it yourself, but the tricks were fabulous in it, you know, and production boxes and torn and restored, cut and restored ribbons and everything, and that was published by Pan Books. You know, these were like 25p, you know, these books.
But you know what? I think that what you said there is, I've talked on this channel about there's a problem in magic at the moment, which is there's so many tricks being released and so many tricks and downloads being produced. And a lot of the time, it's by very inexperienced magicians who think they have created the greatest thing in the world, and they've been in magic for 6 months. And I think part of the reason is, you talked about the introduction that people have to magic. I think that when people come into the magic world, they look around and they see that creators are put on pedestals. They want that magic fame, and rather than back in your day and my day where you kind of got eased into it very slowly, people come into it and they're like, I want to create my own magic, and they start creating stuff which is really rubbish because they haven't got the experience,
and they also don't know that it's been done before. You know, that's it is a real problem, I think, because it's also the ease at which you can put your product out as well. In the old days, magic, I used to learn magic from books. I still do. I love magic books. I still think they're my favorite way of learning a trick. But now, of course, with downloads being the latest thing, that trick, it's technically possible for that trick to have been invented in the morning. You could film the thing on your iPhone in the afternoon, edit it on some free software you've downloaded from Apple Store, and by the evening, you could be selling it as a download. So, and that trick has only been invented that morning, so all the snags and all the presentation hasn't been ironed out. And, you know, whereas a book, you know, so if you decide to bring a book out, or certainly in my day, it's a bit easier now, but a book has to be written, laid out, illustrated, bound into a book and advertised. You know, that's and so that it's going to be a much longer process, and therefore, you know, it's a much more. Anyone can release a brain fart now as a download, but to do it as a book is a much more expensive, and it takes more commitment, I think. You know.
And you know what, you're right, and I'm convinced that there's so many tricks that are released these days, and the person who's releasing them has never performed them in the real world.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. Yeah.
Never. And I told you just off camera, I was speaking to Doc Eason a little while ago, and he said, and this is a really good point, he said, back in the day, when I got into magic, I was taught when I watched videos, it was Pat Page.
Yeah.
It was Michael Amar. It was Daryl. Now, the kids that are coming into magic now, it's like this bloke who's released this download, this guy on YouTube who professes to be an expert, and they're not learning from the masters of magic. They're learning from the Muppets of magic.
People who are still students. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I often wonder how a buyer decides, well, I think I'll buy that. You know, because you're not doing it off the track record of the inventor, are you? You know, you're doing it probably presumably because you like the sound of the effect. I don't know.
Well, I think you can very easily make a trailer that makes something look amazing, and when you get it, you realise it's.
Yeah, I mean, you know, this is where my, you know, because I'm knocking on now. This is where my expertise runs out to a certain extent. You know, what's the word? Magic for social media and social tools is not really my thing, because I think a lot of magic is being created the wrong way around. In other words, the method drives the trick these days. There are certain tricks that exist purely because it's possible to do it. I'm trying to think of, there's one where a tea bag changed into a playing card. And the only reason that tea bag changed into a playing card was it's roughly the same shape. And somebody decided, oh, I wonder if I did this and shook it, it would change into a card. You go, did the world need a tea bag changing into a card? I know that any trick is hard to justify. It's all a certain inbuilt illogicality, but there's certain tricks that only exist because the method is possible. If you see what I mean, it's the wrong way around. The method drives the trick.
It's so true. You know, Bizarro, he was speaking to me the other day, and there's this new trick that's literally just come out that everyone's raving about. And you show a playing card, and you shake it, and it turns into a watch.
Yeah, I commented on it on the internet myself. Yeah.
What's
why?
Why are you turning a playing card? What's the justification? You know that when they buy that card, it's not going to be justified. It's like you hold the card like this, you do this, and now it's watch.
It looks fantastic.
It does, but why?
Yeah. The other thing is as well, it looks so much like a special effect that people are going to do it on their social media channels. And because it's not then examinable, people watching it are going to assume it is a special effect. You know, a camera cut or whatever. You know, that's the problem with it. You know, the tricks are being invented. They look great on social media. They look so good. They look like camera tricks. Well, they might as well be a camera trick because you haven't got the interaction with you. If you could then hand that watch to a real live living person watching, that would be a different thing. But you've got this thing. I know the thing you're talking about, the card literally, and it looks absolutely amazing. The card just literally changes before your eyes into a watch. You know, how's a viewer meant to know that's real, quotes, magic rather than a camera trick?
But if they at least put some sort of routine with it, like, you know, like you look to the watch to tell the time, and you have someone pick a card, and the card changes into the watch, and they look back, and now the card's there or something, and there was some sort of reasoning behind it. But it's like, oh, I've got a method. This is the method. This looks good. £70, please, and it's like,
and it will sell.
It will, but
it looks so good.
People will buy it. They'll do it a couple of times on TikTok or social media, and then they'll whack it in the bottom drawer and never do it again. And
or it'll be on Magic Week for half the price you paid for it a few weeks later. Yeah. The thing is, the reason for that is what we mentioned earlier on, of course. Routines, invented tricks are sometimes the easiest part. The routine is the hard bit.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what takes time. And of course, now, because of the instant nature of the world we live in, you know, invent it today, sell it tomorrow, routines haven't got the time to develop. I've often noticed that on a magic demo, for example, a magic dealer, I'm not going to name names because it's not fair, but a magic dealer will say, you know, right, we're going to take you over to Charlie Farnsbarnes, who's now going to perform this trick for you. And they cut to Charlie Farnsbarnes, who doesn't perform the trick. He basically shows you what the prop does.
Yeah.
You know, because there's no routine, there's no element of performance.
No.
You know, and so really that, you know, so that's why you know, going back to how we even got into all of this was, I think books are a really good medium. You know,
they really are.
Generally, the material in them has been thought about and not just invented that morning. You know, and that's where I've always loved books. You know.
Well, let's go back to you got into magic. The bug bit you. You started buying lots of magic books.
Yeah.
You got yourself educated. Did you jump from school straight into full-time magic, or
no? God, no. I lived in Llandudno, and I did some school shows, you know, for the school, and the government at that point, they were always as duplicitous as every government ever is now. And in an attempt to hide the dole figures, they invented this scheme called the Work Experience Scheme, and it basically guaranteed all school leavers 6 months' work. It was just a way of disguising the jobless figures, really, you know. And because they knew I was into magic, I lived in a seaside town that had 5 theatres. And I went to work and they said, well, this guy would be good in a theatre. So I got a job in the Arcadia Theatre in Llandudno, which is in North Wales. The IBM have been there for the conventions. And that was a fabulous grounding, really, because I was 17 years old. And in the morning, I'd come in and I'd clean the toilets. And then in the afternoon, I would, you know, in the evening, I'd be there in a suit, front of house, guiding people to their seats. It was a summer show, you know, seaside variety show. And then in the afternoon, I would be helping the stage manager with all the backstage stuff, you know, rigging lights, setting curtains and battens. And I learned everything. I learned, you know, the technical know-how of working in a theatre, the terms, you know, about the parts of the stage and about the wings and that was a great thing to. And then every night I got to watch a variety show, and that's the way you really learn magic, or you learn anything, was to repeat, you know. And in that 6 months, I watched the same show 100 and whatever it was times, you know. And it really got me into this mindset of professional performer, or what it was like to be a professional entertaining. I learned a heck of a lot, you know, age 17.
And that's the thing.
That was a really good thing, you know, which is an opportunity not many people get, you know.
It's not, but that therein is another problem with people coming into magic now. They see the sort of money that you can make as a corporate on the moment, because we're in the middle of Armageddon. But normally you can see that the people that come in, they're like, oh, this person's making this much for doing a couple of hours close-up magic. This person's making this much, and they don't want to pay their dues. They don't want to do what you just described. They don't want to. They literally just want to go out, buy a few tricks, put themselves a website together. And the same problem that, you know, you talked about, a download can be done on an iPhone and shop that day. You can create your own website in a couple of days these days. You know, they're putting together a website. They've put together business cards, and they're marketing themselves as a professional close-up magician. Literally a month after coming into the industry, and it's.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think. Do you know what, Craig? I tend to agree that it's a problem, but you know what, they could be right. I mentioned it once again. I'm covering old ground here, but when I was in my 20s, which is a long time ago now, there were 4 channels on TV, and Paul Daniels was at the height of his fame from the late 70s through the 80s to the early 90s. And when I was doing close-ups, when I was 23, 24, doing close-up magic, I just concentrated on improving my act. I didn't have any ambitions at all to be on TV because there was no outlet. But, you know, Daniels was the magician for TV, and there really was, you know, there weren't, you know, Wayne Dobson was very successful, you know, in the later 80s and that. But so I didn't concentrate on trying to get TV work now. But now when I go to the Circle, there's quite a lot of young kids there, and I don't think, this is just my opinion, they're not working hard enough on their act. They're trying to get on TV. And you know what? They might be right, because there's so many more. There's 200 TV channels now, you know, and if they look good, you know, TV might snap them up for their own TV show, you know, and I think there's more, you know, and so this is where my age or whatever it is runs out here, you know, because I think I don't know whether it's right or wrong, you know. To me, I miss it because I don't think they're as good a performer as they should be. You know, I used to think the best way to get on doing magic is to just do your act, get a better and better act, and eventually good things will happen. But perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps now you just need to look the right way, perform halfway competently, and somebody will snap you up for some TV thing or other, you know. And I don't know if they're right or wrong, to be honest.
I just think that you should try to be the best that you can be. You know, you should always be.
That's my philosophy as well.
Yeah.
You know, that's the right way around to do it. You know, I've mentioned this before in another interview, but Ian Keeble, I always remember Ian Keeble was on a panel once. It was at the Magic Circle, and it was a question and answer thing. And somebody said to Ian, how do you avoid being heckled? And Ian's answer was, you get a better act. And, you know, I thought that was my attitude, you know, I just, you know, that's how good things happen. You know, you just get a better act and good things will happen. But I'm not so sure that's because the other thing is, and this isn't the fault of the magicians, and this is just society really. When I grew up, and I do realise I'm starting to sound like an old fart here, but when I grew up, you generally had to have talent to get on TV. But now, and there's no, you know, there are people who growing up, they're in their 20s, who have seen people with no talent whatsoever do very, very well. Joey Essex, Gemma Collins, all these reality names, they've got no talent whatsoever, and yet they do well. And they watch telly and go, well, I could do that. And they might be right. You know, perhaps we are now living in a stage where talent's not important, you know. And I'm asking myself these questions as much as I'm not giving you any answers here. I'm asking myself the question, is talent important anymore to get on TV, you know, and do well and become a millionaire? It doesn't seem to be with people like Joey Essex and Gemma Collins.
No, although you do see the people that are going on Britain's Got Talent as an example now, or at least the magicians that are getting through to the final, they're doing, you know, they are doing so much better. Their act is so much better. And I think Russ Stevens has a big part to play with that. But, you know, I remember Britain's Got Talent back in the day when Magic they used to have one token magician go through. And everywhere they used to do that big montage of like, let's insult all magicians and watch them screwing up, and then there's this one guy that's actually okay. But now it's not the case. Now Magic's dominating. So
it is at the moment, but things change, don't they? And I must admit, Russ is doing a great job on Britain's Got Talent, and I think the magicians who have done well on it have learned how to do it over the years. That's the difference. They've learned they need a backstory. They've learned they need to, you know, TV-friendly magic. They learn to pull one of the judges out to help with a trick, you know. And this all helps, you know. They've learned to sort of generally tug at the heartstrings, as it were, you know, which is something that's taken a few years to get, but they finally got there, and they're benefiting from it now. You know, to me, I'm not that interested, to be honest, you know, in that, because it just seems a bit transparent to me. But there again, I'm no expert on how to you know, the future of magic. People ask me what's the future for magic. I haven't got a clue. You know? Yeah,
I'm totally with you.
I'm telling you about the past, but I don't know where magic's going.
Well, let's go back into the past for a bit.
Yeah, okay.
You've just finished at work experience at a theatre.
Yeah.
When did you then become semi-professional? And you carried on?
I think that's what it was. Yeah. One of the guys that worked at the theatre was a guy called Willie Wise, who was a Scottish entertainer, and he did Scottish country dancing, Scottish songs. He used to wear a kilt doing his act. And this is a lesson for magicians as well. I must come back to magic clubs as well, remind me. But Willie Wise, he had a stammer. And he overcame that. You know, he was one of these people that when he knew what he was going to say, he was fine. But in everyday conversation, he would stammer, you know. And he invited me. He did his Scottish country dancing in the theatre. And he's singing in the theatre. But in the evenings, he would tour. And this is where the work was in Llandudno, in the hotels. The tourists would all, you know, they'd get bed, breakfast, evening meal, and a woman of your choice for 30 quid a night or whatever, you know. And they'd have a show, and he said to me, "You do magic, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Would you like to come and be my support act in the hotels?" And I said, "Well, that'd be good. What does that involve?" He said, "Well, you've got to do 20 minutes, and then I will come on and I'll do my mind reading act." I said, "Mind reading act? Will you do mind reading act?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, where did you learn it?" He said, "I've got one book." And he got he got the bound volume of Corinda's 13 Steps to Mentalism. Everything in his act came out of that book. He didn't have any other magic books or any other mind reading books. And he would go around. I would do 20 minutes of parlor magic, really, I suppose, you know. And then Willie would do 45 minutes of mind reading, or 40 minutes or whatever, half an hour of mind reading. And then we'd go off and do another hotel. He was probably on about 20 quid, and I would be on a 5. We're talking 1976 or something like that. And that was and that's again, it's that coming back to that. It's when I was starting to work for real laymen. Now I'll tell you what happened as well that really inspired me. I used to play bridge when I was 12, unusual lad. So I used to play bridge when I was about 13, I think it was. And I joined this bridge club, and I shuffled a pack of cards in front of this. My partner was an old lady in her 70s. And I shuffled a pack of cards using a riffle shuffle one day. She said, "Oh, that's good. How do you do that?" And I showed her a few tricks. And she said, "Well, I know the president of the Magic Circle." And I said, "You what?" She said, "Yeah." And of course, she didn't know the president of the Magic Circle. What she knew was the person she knew was the president of the North Wales Magic Circle at the time. So she introduced me to him, and I used to go around to see him. And that was where I got access to proper magic books, because he was this old guy, Harry, he was in his 60s, used to drive a Woolsey. And he had a locked cupboard in his house, treated it all seriously. That's another thing, his cupboard with his magic books in was locked. With glass front. And in there were things like Greater Magic, C. Lang Neil's Modern Conjurer, the Hoffman books. And he probably had about 100 books in this cabinet. And I used to go and see him once every couple of weeks, and he would allow me to loan one book, only one at a time. And that's a great thing as well. He didn't, I wasn't bombarded with information, I didn't have 20 books to flick through. And so I would take this one book away and I'd read it cover to cover, in the 2 weeks,
That's cool.
And so once again, that's that sense of progression, you know what I mean? And he basically wangled it so that I could join the North Wales Magic Circle as an associate member when I was 14, because membership was 18. But they created out of nowhere this associate membership for 14 years and above. And of course, then that opened the floodgates. Then I saw Abra for the first time. Trevor Lewis was a member at the time, and a load of great old magicians, Oscar Paulson, Cyril Tomlinson. They've all got contributions in Corinda and stuff like that. But the person that influenced me the most and was a massive help was Rovi, who I met there, and I used to go and visit him in his house in Carnarvon. And I used to see him work the hotels in Llandudno, and that he was a master entertainer. He had all the lines, he was charming, and his magic was terrific. Stand-up card magic, a lot of it. But he would do things like card in orange as well, and he did a rope routine, did Dippy Duck, and the paddle move, the I'll start again routine, with the dots on the knife. And I saw him perform many times in the hotels in London in front of laymen, and of course you can't fail to learn by watching somebody like that,
I think that's half the thing. You need to watch, you need to be exposed to so many different performing styles, because I think at the beginning, when people get into magic, they struggle to find their own character.
Yeah, you do, yeah.
You can find your own character is by looking at how everybody else does, right. and having it all come in and
it's controversial, but you need to emulate people you admire. Yeah. And then what will happen over the years is you'll shed certain bits of their performance character and add bits of your own. So you end up different, but it's very difficult to, when people say, how do you improve your act? I like to think of it in reverse. When you watch, I don't know about you, but I've learned more from watching bad performers than good performers over the years, because it's much easier if you want to improve your act. If you think about it, if I said to you, if you said to me, how do I improve my act, Dave? I couldn't really tell you specifically how to improve your act, but I can tell you in general terms, you improve your act by getting rid of the bad bits. And if you can get rid of the bad bits, your act will improve by default, if you see what I mean. And I don't know about you, but I find it much easier when I'm watching. Very difficult when a magician. I've watched Noel Britton entertain on the streets and storm it with crowds of hundreds of people watching him. And I've watched his crowd build. He's got a technique for building a crowd, or he did have, because he's known it for years. But He used to have a crowd build technique with a Rocky Raccoon, and I've watched that dozens of times, and I still don't get it. I don't know how it works. I don't know how he's doing it. It's like magic. And all the good bits, and he would storm it, and it'd be quite hard to understand why or what he was doing to storm it. But on the other hand, I've watched other terrible magicians, and I go, well, okay, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. Oh, and I do that. I do that. I must stop doing that because it's terrible. It looks terrible, you know. And if you think of it in reverse, that's how you improve your act. You cut out all the bad bits, and that will automatically improve your act. Do you follow? Yeah. I find that much easier to visualize in my head than trying to improve what I do. It's better to try and get rid of all the bad things that I do.
So how would you, I mean, obviously you back in the day were exposed to a lot of amazing magicians who were very welcoming and took you out on the
great club, North Wales, they're very friendly.
You mentioned magic clubs before. You don't really get that these days with magic.
I don't think you do. I don't think you do.
And I've talked about this on the channel, but most magic clubs, what happens is they come in, they're very cliquey, they don't do magic at all. Then there's a lecturer who comes in, does a glorified deal of them, and everyone leaves. And on the club nights, I remember going to a magic club once, and it was a club night, and I was like, right, okay, let's do some magic. Not a single trick done all night. Everyone was just talking and introducing themselves, and it's like not a single. It's like it's a freaking magic club, you know. Surely part of the magic club should be people showing each other magic, and these days, I think someone new into magic, they're not going to find a mentor like you did so easily, because a lot of the people in magic clubs are not professionals. They
were never all professionals in those. I think what it is, Craig, I think magic's so easily accessible that magic clubs aren't as valued as they used to be. You know, when I lived in North Wales, there weren't magic shops in every street corner. You know, there weren't internet magic shops. If I wanted to watch magic now after this interview, I could just go stick my computer on and surf the internet and watch as much magic as my heart desired. But when I was 15, 16 years old in North Wales, I got to see magic once a month on a Tuesday night. And that night was sacrosanct. It wasn't, you know, if I wasn't playing football, I wasn't doing that night. There was one night a month that I was not going to miss the magic club. And of course, when you got to the magic club, most people were like that. You know, they couldn't watch magic. You know, if they were lucky, David Nixon's show or Paul Daniels might have been on in the week, and we'd all talk about whatever magic had been on telly. Well, all that's gone now. Magic clubs aren't as valued as they used to be, because you could just go home and watch magic, or, you know, whereas in those days you didn't, you know.
So how, if you were on a mission to fix the magic clubs around the UK, because I do think they're needed. What would you do? It's
difficult to tell, really, isn't it? You provide what can't be provided by the internet, I suppose, is the answer. You know, I do think that the venue's important. It's got to be a place that's nice to spend time in. Now, I don't know about you. There's a lot of magic clubs I know that meet in absolute horrible places, you know, that I don't want, you know, I wouldn't want to spend any time in. So I think I would say to a magic club, try and find a nice venue that's a pleasure to be in. You know, there's one club, and I won't name the name, but you can't hear the lecture because somebody's playing in a darts match next door, and the crowd have shouted and cheering, you know, and it looks like a converted Nissan hut. You know, that, no, I'm not blaming anyone for this, but it's not a pleasant atmosphere to spend your time in. You know, Magic Circle, one of the pleasures of going to the Magic Circle is sitting in that custom designed building, watching a lecture in an air-conditioned theatre, you know, all them lovely posters on the wall, you know, the cabinets full of magical apparatus. It just makes it makes you experience so much nicer, you know. When the Magic Circle were at the Victory Services Club, I don't know if you ever went there, it was horrible to go there because it was an atmosphere vacuum. It was a real old-fashioned, bare wooden floor, you know, panelled walls. And I hated it at the Victory Services Club because the venue makes a big difference to me. So I would improve the venue. And And to be honest, most magic clubs seem to do very well. The lecturers, you know, there's one thing there isn't a shortage of, is lecturers. There are lecturers coming out your ear holes these days, you know. And quite often the material's pretty good. It can be a bit derivative and a bit ordinary sometimes, but what there doesn't seem to be is good performers, you know. And I think perhaps you should concentrate on your performers. It's a two-way street, isn't it? The people going to the Magic Club have to want to perform or want to improve, and the club has to have a philosophy where it wants to educate its members properly, you know.
There doesn't seem to be an onus in most clubs about having the members perform. You literally go to a Magic Club and never perform once.
Don't know, that's right.
Perform once and
just watch. There are other clubs that, I mean, there are certain clubs you can be thrown out of for not, you know, I mean, not performance-wise, but I'm sure I could be totally wrong here, but they may not be there. But the Rotarians and the Buffaloes and I think if you don't commit to go to a certain amount of dinners a month and, you know, fellowship meetings, whatever they call them, you can be thrown out. So there is a precedent for that. You know,
maybe that's what it needs to be. People have to force people.
I don't think you can force anything on anyone. That's the problem. You know, that's the problem. I don't know what the answer to Magic Clubs is. It's a difficult one, you know. But I do agree that I think the internet has changed everything, and I think Magic Clubs have sort of been a bit directionless since we've all been able to access the internet.
A lot of people went to Magic Clubs to get advice on this, that, and the other. You can go into a Facebook group these days and get access to so many. Yeah. Although unfortunately,
they've lost their reason for existence to a certain extent.
They have, yeah.
Now I'm sentimental about Magic Clubs because I remember, like as I was saying, it was my only chance to see magic was to go and see. You know, I used to, you know, it was a pleasure to, you know, you'd see a trick advertised in a copy of the Magigram, and somebody'd say, "Well, I've got that trick. I'm going to do it at one of our meet and show, you know." And you thought, and you were genuinely excited to see a trick that you'd only seen on paper in a catalogue before, and you'd see it performed live, you know. Whereas now, if you want to see it performed live, you can just watch a demo video, can't you? You know.
Exactly.
So why go to a Magic Club meeting if the weather's a bit naff, or you know, or if you don't like the venue, or
the Magic Circle have been doing a much better job with the Magic Circle Unlocked.
Fabulous, yeah.
That's opened a lot of people's eyes, which is great.
Yeah.
As you know, I've never been the biggest fan of the Magic. But after the first Unlocked, I had to go, yeah, okay, fair enough. You guys have just smashed it at the park. That was brilliant. And having Michael J. Fitch as the face of it was such a
great. Yeah, Noel Britton's great. I mean, I just think it's a pleasure to be a member of the Magic Circle, and you know, everybody should consider joining. Really, in my opinion, you know, purely because they've got, including you, Craig.
I've joined twice.
Oh, you joined? Have you joined?
I used to be AIMC before they kicked me out.
Yeah.
So I used to be Silver Star, and then that didn't go well after a while. But you know, between me and Scott Penrose.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. Oh well, we'll move on from there, I think.
I think it's public knowledge. But yeah, so you were really fully indoctrinated into magic.
Yeah.
You're going out watching Roby. You're getting to meet some amazing magicians. When did you then take the leap to full-time magic and then go, right?
There was a bit of a gap then. I mean, I was always into magic, but then I went to college as a mature student, ended up doing a computer, you know, in those days, in the 80s, if you did a computer degree, you were set for life. Well, that turned out to be a joke, didn't it? You know, God knows how many unemployed computer programmers there are out there, but there must be a few. And so I still kept up the magic and everything, joined all the local magic clubs. I was in the Midlands at that point, and let me just get this straight. Yeah, we're talking sort of 83, 84 now.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Stafford college there, and then I moved to Manchester, and then that was, that was it really, because I joined the Order of the Magi in Manchester, a very old magic club, and somebody said to me there, "Oh, do you know about this restaurant that's opening?" And I said, "No." And then I understand Rovey recommended it. So Well, what happened was there was a journalist chap called Richard Adamson who loved magic, performed magic, and he always had a dream to open a restaurant doing magic every night of the week. It was open, and he bought a restaurant in South Manchester. And then he knew of Rovey, so he rang Rovey and said, "Would you like to?" Because Rovey was doing magic in those days, all over the country, working for people, an agent called Barry Williams, and for Paul Stone. And he knew Rovey worked, so he said to Rovey, "Would you come and do some magic in my restaurant?" And then Richard also recruited people from the Magi, to be a team of magicians. And he tells me that Rovey eventually recommended me. And so that was a double bubble thing for me. I was a member of the Magi, and Rovey recommended me as well. So Richard said, "Well, you can come and work here," So that he employed me. And Sean McCree, who's a well-known magician, worked there as well. Sean's great bloke, yeah. Dave Allen was a local fellow. I don't know if he's doing magic so much now. I hope he's still out. If you're out there, Dave, hello. Peter Clifford. Now, I don't know if you know Peter Clifford. Pete's a great magician, an actor. He advised Derren Brown in the early specials. And Pete was at Manchester studying his acting degree or whatever it is they do. And in those days, of course, to get into equity, you had to sneak in through the back door. Now it's a bit easier to get in now. But he always wanted to be an actor. But there was this catch-22 going on, where you had to have contracts to join equity, but you couldn't get the contracts unless you were in equity. If it was a real catch-22, So Pete worked there as a magician. So there was a small team working in this restaurant, and it was what would be the word now? I suppose a continental food, mixed fusion of food. And I would be doing my day job because I was a computer programmer now, and I was working for Dewar's Jam, who are based in Manchester. Very nice jam, Dewar's Jam, by the way. Thoroughly recommend it. And I was doing the computer in the daytime, and then I was going to the restaurant in the evening. And before long, I was making more money doing the restaurant than I was in the. And this set up a little. Oh, this is good. You can make money doing this. Before it's serious money. For the time, it was serious money. And I was making more money from the restaurant than I was doing the day job. But that was the only, apart from a place called the Magic Moments on Regent Street in London, that was the only venue in the whole of Britain doing magic on a regular basis.
Yep.
Every night of the week. And of course, I've mentioned it again, but if you do magic every night of the week, you will improve. You could have a new routine. You could bring it in. By the end of night one, you may have done it a dozen times. If you do 4 nights a week, at the end of that week, you've done that routine 50 times. And that leads to improvement. It leads to changes. You discard the bits that don't work and build the bits that do. And we were that team were the very first team of people doing magic right in the trenches, right at the start of the close-up boom in those days. John O'Talker used to work there occasionally as well. John had written a book on how to do restaurant magic as well. So we were really in at the beginning. It was Manchester as well, so that was the Happy Mondays, the Roses, and all. And it was we'd have all sorts of people coming in the restaurant.
Because for people that are watching this that are newer into magic, the time period that Dave's describing, these days, it's probably very hard for people to comprehend, but these days, everybody who comes into magic, it's close-up magic, close-up magic, close-up magic. But back in the day, close-up magic was not really a thing. I remember when I first got into magic, I remember saving up to get a chair suspension. That was the stuff I was buying, chair suspension, squared circle productions, and I was getting these big props because I wanted to be a stage magician, which was the thing, right? But
it was a thing,
yeah. But
theatres were still open. Clubs were starting to. Working men's clubs were starting to die down, but theatres, summer shows were still big in those days. Which they're not anymore, of course. So holiday camps, were massive. So there was work for a stage magician.
But what you're describing right now is when everything in the UK switched. And
it did really, yeah.
became the thing.
In those days, it was funny, you know, if a lecturer did close-up magic, when was the last time you heard this? You know, one of the questions you'd always be asked is, how do you approach a table? You never hear that now. You know, people have sort of sussed that. And is it best to work seated or standing? That used to be a very popular question, you know. And of course, everybody works standing now. You know, it was in its infancy in those days. Nobody, because a lot of close-up magic was referred to as pocket tricks, you know, which was very sort of, I was sort of dismissive, you know. I mean, magic really boomed, close-up magic boomed in the 70s and 80s, didn't it really? And then restaurant magic in Britain certainly didn't get go. But it never really, beyond us and Magic Moments, there aren't many other restaurants. Mark Bennett, of course, is doing it now in Bristol.
Yeah, he had Illusions.
Yeah, still does, you know, which is great. That's going.
Yeah, and Houdini's down in
Houdini's, man, that's right. Yeah, and then the Jasper Blakely down in South Wales, that they are doing the little place, you know. Yeah, so it's still going on, but in those days there was nothing, you know. And we were sort of making our own rules up as we went along, really, you know. But it was great. We'd get everyone in there, from rock stars to criminals, you know, and you, once again, you learn a lot by working through these different audiences, you know.
Yeah. And is that where you decided to take the plunge and go full time?
That's what, because I mean, that I was doing that, and the restaurant closed after a couple of years, but I was still carrying on. By that point, I was now working for different. In those days, it was agents, you know. Another thing I'm no expert on now is promotion on the internet and social media. I'm clueless, you know. For many years, Craig, and you're not going to believe this, I didn't even have a business card.
I can believe it.
I just sat and waited for the phone to ring, and I was on about 20 agents' books. And if they rang and gave me 3 or 4 jobs a year each, I could work 80 nights a year, you know, and I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing. Didn't even have a business card.
I remember those days when it was like you got onto an agent's radar, and man, you were set. You were set then. You got onto an agent's radar. You didn't have to do anything. They just... Yeah,
it was great. It made me very lazy, you know. And I also had 2 or 3 different residencies in Birmingham, because I then moved back down to the Midlands. And I had 3 at one point. I had 3 residencies going, you know, and they were all about 100 quid each, these residencies. So, you know, we're talking early 90s here, you know, 300 quid before I had any. I was getting 300 quid a week before I had any proper jobs come in, if you see what I mean. So, you know,
that's great.
I wish I was making as much these days as I used to make in those days, you know. But and that was my boom years, you know, the sort of the 90s, you know, the early to 90s and the turn of the, you know, up to 2005. So that was basically, I was a full-time pro from then, and I was basically getting work from agents, you know.
And when did, because you've entered quite a few competitions.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about some of the competitions. What was your reasoning to enter competition? Because you've won a lot as well. Do you think that entering competitions has improved your career? Because that's something that comes up in this channel a lot. Oh, should I enter a competition? What should I do in the competition? And there's less competitions these days. The club competitions don't mean as much. Back then, you had the international competition was massive. The IBM
prize money on that one. And of course, that opened a few doors. There was decent prize money on that one, if I remember right. And it opened doors internationally for you. That's what competitions did in those days. Now, I'm not sure they do the same these days. But I won the IBM competition in 1990. Here's an interesting, this is a bit of encouragement for people. I entered the IBM competition in 89, and I was still working in the restaurant then. And this was up in Scarborough. So I was doing, and I entered the competition with the attitude I'll do the material I do in the restaurant, because I mean that's always the thing to do. Don't try and invent anything new, is the general. Just do what you do. Same goes for an audition. If anybody decides to join a magic club or the magic circle or whatever, just do the stuff you know. So I entered the IBM close-up magic competition, and I came 5th out of 6 in 1989, because I was doing sponge balls and, you know, standard basic restaurant magic, you know, which is perfect for laymen, but wasn't going to win any competitions. And then I thought, well, this isn't going to do me any good in the long run. So 1990, the Eastbourne Magic, the IBM convention, and it was the IBM convention in those days. 2,000 magicians used to go to the IBM convention, and it was probably the biggest outside of the Magic Circle, perhaps, competition. It was the biggest one to win in this country. Was the IBM Zena Bennett Trophy. Daniels won it. Paul Dobson won it. You know, Peter Duffy. Lots of big names won it, and I won it in 1990 because I literally thought, well, what I was doing in 89 is not competition winning material stuff. So I changed the whole thing and I made it. I did Williamson's wand routine. I did carding block of ice. You know, so it was all pretty strong stuff, really, you know. And I won it in 1990, but that's and then I never ever entered again. I thought I won it once. What's the point of entering?
That's the thing,
you know.
And that has opened up doors for you.
And what it did, you see, that opened up international. I got booked for Blackpool. And once you're at Blackpool, you see you know, and then the people at Blackpool saw me and they said, and Ron Macmillan. See, that's when I got to know the Macmillan family. And Ron Macmillan was a great magician and a great bloke, and the whole family was great. And Ron got me bookings abroad at magic conventions in Belgium and Italy and places like that. And of course, it's a bit of a snowball once you're seen, you're seen, you know. And what it did for me was opened a few doors.
Yeah.
You know, and of course, getting in with international then led on to me doing videotapes for them at a time where videos were starting to get popular, you know.
So what would you say? Okay, and the reason I'm going to ask this is you and I have sat at many a magic convention, watching a competition act, many a magic club watching a competition, and you and I have been bitching to each other at the back.
Yeah, afraid so, yeah.
About how shit the acts are.
Yeah.
What and I think that we're both on the same page as to why they're shit. But I think that we should share this with everybody else, because there are people out there that want to win magic competitions. Yeah. And it will, you know, look at even today, if you can win a cup, the close-up competition at Blackpool, you can get onto the competition circuit, IBM, SAM convention, FISM maybe. I mean, look at Matthew Wright. You know, a lot of his fame even now has come from what he's done at FISM. Yeah. So competitions are still a big thing.
Yeah.
What advice would you give people? Because I know you and I have sat there watching acts and going, look, it's 5 minutes in and nothing's happened.
Exactly. Yeah. Get on with it is the basic. I mean, I've not competed at that sort of level. Matt Wright's excellent, you know. I'm fair play, you know, to do as well as he did at FISM. That's a real achievement, you know. So that's great. Good on him. But I mean, if you're going to win, let's get this down to local magic club level. Right, okay, you know, don't set your sights on winning major competitions. Just try and win your local club. And the number one fault, and you alluded to it just there, is just they don't get on with it. There was one I mean, I'll come out with it. I hate mentalism. I hate it. I think it's deadly dull. I think, you know, and most people get in. I don't know why young kids getting into mentalism, because and there again is the old fart in me coming out. The one accepted truism about mentalism when I was young is you can't really do mentalism until you look as though you've got a few years on the clock. You know, you mentalism, if you want to make it mysterious and spooky and that, you got to look as though you've been reading books bound in human skin in some monastery in Tibet for years. You know, you know this thing. You know, I know you like the tats. You know, but some kid with his cap on back to front and some tattoos, it doesn't convince me that he's a master of the mystic arts, to be honest. You know, Doctor Strange, you know, throwing lightning bolts and all this sort of stuff. That's how I see a mentalist, you know. But there was one mentalist we were watching, and bearing in mind, they all get the rules beforehand, and the rules might say you get 12 minutes, and after that you start getting deducted. I'm timing what you were there. I was timing one mentalist, and by the time he'd sorted out his stall, he'd introduced his props, he'd made a prediction, he'd given this to some bloke in the audience, he'd given a calculator to someone else, he'd rootling around in his bag for all his pens and his bits of carbon and all that crap. He did, in effect, it was 8 minutes before he got his first round of applause, 8 minutes out of a 12-minute act. And you just think, what are you thinking of? Have you even analysed this in your own head? You know, just make an impact, you know, just there's one mentalist that is a grand exception to all of this, and it's Graham Jolly. If you want to be a mentalist, you've got to go and watch Graham Jolly, because he comes out there and he hits them. He hits them within the first minute. You know, the old tradition, I don't know if Graham does it anymore, but I'm sure his opener was, "You, sir, count your change in your pocket," you know, and he'd have his pencil out. "How much you got?" 48p. "What does it say on there?" "You will have 48p in your pocket." You know, his first effect's over in less than a minute. You know, plus he's got that incredible personality that could only be Graham. He's got personality lines that only work for him because he's established his character and that, you know. So rule number one is get on with it.
And the perfect example on that point is you and I have both watched Steve Della in a competition, and this is a guy who's made his career as a mentalist. Yeah. And yet when he enters competitions, he does
magic.
And he does card magic.
Exactly.
He does stuff like that because he knows that's what's going to win the bloody thing.
Well, you've got to, and another thing is as well, there's no point in complaining about this now, whether it's right or wrong. Remember when you were at school and people said, you know, if you were going to take an exam, the piece of advice that every teacher would give you was make sure you have a go at every question. Because if there's 10 questions and there's 10 marks for each question, if you've only answered 4 questions, the maximum mark you will ever be able to score is 40, because you've not even attempted the others. Okay, so there is no point in complaining. So if you get the list of requirements for a competition, you follow every one of them. So if you get 10 points for dressing smartly, don't turn up in your jeans, because if you decide to be a rebel or whatever and say, well, I don't perform like that, you're only going to be marked out of 90. If you've already decided to lose 10 marks because you're not going to, so get all the, you know, now I'm being extreme there just to make a point, but if there's marks for sleight of hand, make sure you do some sleight of hand. If there's marks for comedy, make sure you do some comedy. Don't say, well, I'm not doing that, because if you do, you're not going to be marked out of 100. You're going to be marked out of, if you storm it with everything, you're not, you know, you're losing marks for that category. So look at the rules and fill every category. Try and see where you're act. Right, I'll get some points for that because I do that or I do that, but you know, audience handling. You know, if you get marks for how you handle your audience volunteers, oh, I don't do any tricks that need an audience volunteer, then change that. Put a trick in your act that needs an audience volunteer. You know, pretty simple stuff, really, but. You know, and then don't perform to the props, perform to the audience. That's there again. And do the stuff you know. You know, that's the other thing. You know, don't introduce something you've never done before just for a competition, because sure as eggs is eggs, it's going to go wrong.
Yeah.
Or even if it goes right, it's not going to be polished because you've never done it before. So do stuff you know, fill in all the categories, get on with it. You know. Variety as well, another thing. You know, you are going to win. You know, you're going to win if you're going to do a themed act based on keys or anything you like. I think audiences appreciate variety. You know, probably that's basic rules for competitions, but probably a lot more. I could, if I had a few more minutes thought. But
no, that's really good advice, and I think it's something that people need to hear, because a lot of people want to enter competitions, and you know, at the end of the day, you've been there, you've done that. Here's a question for you: what's that you've been to so many conventions, and I know you like watching competition acts.
Yeah.
What's the best competition act you've ever seen? I can think of 2.
Oh.
I can think of 2.
Okay.
In my entire
Tell
career.
me yours, and I'll try and have a think, because it's difficult on that.
Mark Stitcher's dental act.
Yes, superb. Yeah.
And Steve Bedwell's Walkman act.
Yeah, very well thought out, both of those. Yeah,
those were the 2 that stood out for me. When especially Steve Bedwell, because when I remember watching Steve Bedwell, and I didn't see that Walkman go under that hat, and then he said, "I'm going to get that under." I'd never seen anything like that before. He was basically challenging the audience. I'm going to get that under that hat 3 more times, and no one could catch it. Yeah, and he did. Every time, and no one caught it.
Which is a sort of variation of the card under the glass plot, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, we're talking again there. You know, this goes back to what we were talking earlier. He had a logic in his act that made sense. For example, he was doing a Walkman act, and he had his earphones on, he had his headphones on, and the headphones had sponge balls in. So that gave him the perfect opportunity to do a sponge ball routine, you know. So yeah, so if you can routine, so I don't know, you've caught me on the spot there. I'm not gonna answer that question because I can't think offhand. I can't think of any. I'm sure I will. I'm sure as we talk, so oh yeah, that was a great act, you know.
There's so many that you've seen, I imagine. So many.
Yeah. I mean,
especially at Ron's.
I love watching shows that conventions to me are not about, you know, I don't think I do any tricks where I learned in a lecture to be. I love watching a good lecture, you know, if it's well done. I was talking to someone the other day and mentioned on the internet that I'm very lucky in so much as a lot of my favorite performers are my friends now, you know, and the best lecture without a shadow of a doubt I've ever seen in my life was David Williamson in Southport in 2007. For the IBM. It was stunning. It was hilarious. The magic was great. And it had even got life lessons in it, I think. Can I repeat the...
Please do.
Yeah, he tells this very funny story about when he was a young kid, a farm boy growing up in Ohio. He would join the local magic club and they'd get the great magicians coming through, you know, and doing lectures, Amar and Darryl and people like that, and Roger Klaus and people like that. And Dave would sit there, you know, and he would absorb like a sponge this brilliant magic that people were doing. And then Amar would say, any questions? And there'd be an old fellow at the back and he'd stick his hand up. And we've all had this. And he'd go, could you tell me how to do an Elmsley count, please? Right, and all the kids in the audience go, oh, no, we've got this great lecture. Brilliant lecture, and we'll have to stop now while Grandad at the back learns how to do an Elmsley count from this brilliant magician at the front, you know. So they said, oh, breathing and huffing and puffing. Anyway, fast forward 25 years or so. Dave's in LA and he's staying with John Carney. He said to John Carney, Carney said to him, oh, there's Dan and Dave Bucker doing a lecture tonight at the magic shop. Should we go and see them? So Dave goes, all right. So they turn up at this lecture. Dan and Dave are at the front and they're doing all the wiggly diddly cut stuff, you know, all the stuff they do, you know, what do they call it? Extreme, what do they call it? I don't know.
Yeah,
all the cuts.
Manipulation, yeah.
Yeah, Dave said they name all these cuts. You do a viper, and then you go into Sybil 3, and then you go into a cobra. And at one point, Dave sticks his hand up and he goes, excuse me, what's a cobra? And all these kids in the audience go, oh no. Oh God, we're in brilliant lecture. We've got to stop now while Grandad learns what a cobra is, you know. And Dave says, I am that man. I have grown up to be the man I hated. You know, and you go, that's a real life lesson, you know. We all grow up to be what we mock when we're younger.
That's very funny.
And anyway, and it ended up with a stupid sequence with John Feely on guitar and a videotape that went wrong. And it's a brilliant lecture, you know. And but it's more of a performance. That's how I got into this rambling story. It's not so much a lecture. I've always enjoyed performers, you know, and that's one. And there again, I'm going to be an old fart again. And I feel like Bobby Bernard now. You took the circle. Bobby would sort of say, "Oh, in my day, the magicians was better," you know. But I've seen people like Fred Capps, who I think is the best ever magician I've ever seen in my life. He did everything perfectly. And I've seen Tom Mullican, I've seen Al Goshman, and I've seen so many great, Salvano, millions of great performers, you know. And I'm not seeing that now at magic conventions. I'm seeing kids who are really good at coming up with tricks. But when they then say, okay, we've got a show, those self-same kids, pretty pedestrian when it comes to performing, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, no doubt now you're going to get hundreds of people putting comments. What about so-and-so? He's great. And I'm going to have to go, yeah, he is great. Yeah, he is great. But my sort of impression, you know, in my adult brain is that there's not so many good performers around now as there used to be.
And I think the emphasis, and that comes back to the fact that how magic is marketed these days. In the old days, you know, you would see the new L&L DVD set. And if you remember, not even the old days. In the old days, we're going to go back to Vic Pinto.
That's pretty recent to me.
Yeah, we're going to go back to Vic Pinto and beyond.
Yeah.
In the not so old days, you know, the L&L DVDs, you can take the piss as much as you want to out of the fake audience, but it was a 30-minute show where one trick went into another trick, went into another trick, went into another trick.
Mm.
And then they sat down and explained it all, and they talked about transitioning in between routines.
Yeah, yeah.
They talked to, I was speaking to Doc Eason when I interviewed him a little while ago, and he was talking about his DVD set he did with L&L, where they came over to his bar.
That's right, yeah.
And he said that he insisted that they come to the bar because he wanted to show it in the environment it was meant to be taught.
As if you were there, yeah.
These days, this is a trick. This is a trick.
Yeah.
This is a trick. This is a trick. Let me show you this download. This is a real do you know what I mean?
I think what you're referring to is the rise of the one-trick DVD, and now the one-trick download. So, you know, I used to get confused 10 or 15 years ago, where have I bought a trick here with the instructions on DVD, or have I bought a DVD with the prop necessary to do the trick? Because they were blending into DVDs, and tricks were blending into one thing. Have I bought a DVD with the prop, or have I bought a prop, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of the one-trick DVD, to be honest, you know.
And you are right.
Purely from a value for money thing for a start off, you know.
Books really are the best way to go. I don't understand. Okay, there are certain tricks that, you know, maybe they're worth it, but you can spend £50 on a trick with a 20-minute download, or you can spend £50 on a book and have like tons of information.
Yeah, and it's absorbable in a more, for me anyway, I find it easy to absorb. And of course, everyone talks about this. You don't become a clone of the person. You've got to interpret a book, whereas a DVD you can just watch and absorb it like a sponge, and just do the trick exactly like the guy on the DVD does it, you know. Yeah. Which is not necessarily a great thing. I mean, there are exceptions. The Jeff McBride manipulation DVDs, I think he did 3 on cards and 3 on balls, thimbles and coins. They're brilliant on DVD, because the manipulation, I think, is easier learned from a DVD than you know, I'm talking back and front palming and stuff like that. You know, it can be quite difficult to interpret, you know, a book on that. Whereas on the Jeff McBride, I don't think there's anything better. They're just the best. There's a lifetime's work on those DVDs. You know? Of course, he's superb, McBride, you know, technically. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about so we got to the point where you were getting a lot of work. You'd met Ron. You were basically being able to sit around at home and do nothing because the agents were just giving you work all the time. Yeah. And you mentioned that meeting Ron led to you producing a videotape through International. You were really the pioneer behind a lot of that stuff. Like, this was before L&L. This was before like DVDs just came out every 5 minutes. This was just after the Vic Pinto stuff.
Talking late 80s, early 90s. Yeah, I think my first tape came out in 1990. And I don't think I was the pioneer. I mean, there was people like Videonics, you know, they were ridiculous. The thing about videos before then, they were ridiculous. When they first came out, you know, the Vernon tapes were done in 81 and released in 81, for example. You know, the Videonics of Revelations tapes, I think it was 70 quid each for an hour-long videotape. You know, they were phenomenally expensive.
I remember when I first got into Magic, there were only 4 places you could get Magic instructional video from. There was Videonics, there was Tricker Tape, there was the stuff that Repro Magic were putting out, like Lovell's Close-Up Magic to Tap Dance. And the Tap Dance
Supreme did a series, didn't they, in Britain?
But then the big one was International. It was like they had all of their competitions on videotape, and they had all the lectures on videotape. I remember that's where I first saw Gary Kurtz.
Gary Kurtz, yeah. And Williamson, of course. I mean, that was superb, you know.
Williamson, Kurtz.
And it's still the best. They're there. I mean, it's rough as nails. It's filmed on a terrible camera, and there's a bloke sitting on the floor. But they've got the only, to my knowledge, I know he released a tape of his own, but they've got the only complete version of Goshman doing his act, filmed, you know, with warts and all, where things go wrong and everything. But it's brilliant, you know. And that might have been their very, very first release, the Goshman performance. I could be wrong there, you know. But you're right. They used to have a convention every December and film every act on it. You know, they would, and then put out the lectures.
But you did a lot of tapes for them. It wasn't just your own
No,
stuff. You had like introduction to close-up magic, and
that was it. Yeah, they wanted something they could sell to, because they've got a real physical bricks and mortar magic shop with walk-in visitors. They would get so many people coming in and saying, "I'd like to learn some magic," or "My son would like to learn magic," and so they wanted something to fill that market. So I did one on cards, which is, and one of my favourite books has been The Royal Road to Card Magic, and I still think it's great. I mean, I love the Roberto Jarbi Card College series, but to me, there's something about Royal Road, its sentimental value, I suppose, and it's just brilliant. And their technique was they showed you a slide, then they showed you a couple of tricks using that slide, then they taught you another slide and another couple of tricks. And as you went through the book, the slides got more difficult and you ended up building a repertoire. Now, I wanted to use that approach on the card magic tape. So what I did was I started off with the top, can't remember what order we did it in now, but a double lift and then a top change and then a pass and then a palm and it eventually all built up into an ambitious card routine that used all the slides they'd learned before. Once again, it's this idea of progression. I've always been a big fan of logical. When you're learning something, do it logically. This tape all built up to this gigantic, ambitious card routine that used all the slides I'd taught earlier on. So I did one of them. I did coins. I did one on mentalism.
Was on.
Yeah.
My God, I probably go on about that on this channel every week because it is, and I've made a career for myself out of telling the truth. I'm honest to my detriment at times, and I'm gone on record several times. That is the best matrix I did. I did it all the time, even in close-up gigs. Like when you do a close-up gig. And you've done the gig and you're at the bar and you're having a drink. That was my go-to bar drink. When the client comes over afterwards and go, "Let me show you something," I'd have my close-up mat in my case. I'd put it on the table. I'd say, "Hey, I wouldn't do this for everyone else. This is something special for you."
And that's the time you can bend the rules, of course, isn't it? If they like you, if you've done a performance, people say, "Oh, you can't do anything with a close-up mat." Yeah, of course you can. You can. If they like you, they'll move heaven and earth for you. They'll move furniture around for you to show them a magic trick if they like what you're doing. You're right. So you never. The thing about uncommercial magic is a strange thing, isn't it? I've had jobs because I've done uncommercial things. I remember once I was on a TV show with Cilla Black on a Saturday night, and it was one of those ridiculous. This was in the days when 20 million people would watch Cilla on a Saturday night. So for the next couple of weeks, I was wandering around. I was giving out autographs and stuff, because it was that many people had seen me. And I only got that job because I did dice stacking. And it was a show called The Moment of Truth where you had to teach. The idea being that they picked on a family. They gave them all video cameras, which were these small ones, which had just been available at the time. Talking mid-90s here, and basically they offered them loads and loads of prizes if one of the members of the family could learn a skill. And they introduced me, and I showed them dice stacking. 4 dice in a cup. They're all in a stack, and then they said to the dad, "You've got to learn this." And I learned a lot about TV on that show, the way they cheat, because the minute I did my bit, it was about 2:00 in the afternoon. We all had to go upstairs with the crew. The dad had to get his pajamas on, and the family had to get their nightwear on, and then we closed all the curtains, and then basically we filmed the dad getting up supposedly in the middle of the night. This is further down. They basically were to film their own progress, and the next week they'd come back and see if they could do it. So this was supposed to be the 3 or 4 days into the journey where he'd been practicing, and he wakes the whole family up in the middle of the night practicing dice stacking. That was shot in the afternoon, just about a couple of hours after the original thing. It's where I started to learn about TV cheating slightly.
Insane.
Because so. Can't remember. We were talking about that, right? Uncommercial magic, So the Matrix is sort of uncommercial in a way because you do need a close-up pad, and you do need unless you've done it on a carpet and stuff, haven't you, Craig?
Many times on carpet, yeah.
So don't never be too dismissive of what you might see as uncommercial magic, So I did a few I did mentalism one. I did And then they got quite inventive into that. They did one on cuts and counts, and so every type of false count. There was a book called Cuts, Counts, Moves and Subtlety by Jerry Menser.
I love that book.
Yeah,
That
well, it's
book,
a one-stop shop, really, isn't it?
Oh, I learned so many of my packet moves with that trick.
Yeah, so it's basically that's that. But if you didn't do a packet trick, that's going to put you. So we did a video version of that. You know, I did one on openers. You know, tricks that were particularly suitable for opening with. You know, and then we did. Well, then they had the idea, and we did this for about 13 or 14 years. Can't remember if we did it once or twice a year. I think we may have started off doing it twice a year, but we did a close-up magic course of 8 weeks duration or 10, and basically where they paid for the lot. They paid a one-off price and got props like cups and balls, chop cup, sponge balls, paddles, all sorts of cards, fake cards, all sorts. And then it was an hour-long lesson every week. And then we'd have an hour hands-on session where I'd go around the tables, and then they'd get a DVD of that lesson and all the props to do it. And we did, and basically, and of course that built again. Once again, that was a progressive build thing until the end. They got a good grounding in it, and we did that as a commercial close-up magic thing. You know,
that's a great idea.
10 lessons, and we did that for 13 years. One a week for 10 weeks, and. Had its day by then, I think, because there were so many other outlets to learn magic from, you know. So that was, so there's quite a few DVDs out there, really.
And then after that, fast forward a few years, you released some stuff with RSVP and Russ Stevens, didn't you?
Actually, well, that was when Russ started off. To be honest with you, I've got a funny feeling it might have been his worst ever selling DVD, because I wanted to do a DVD of lots of stand-up material. So I did a DVD with Russ that had a lot of stand-up, but you couldn't do much of the stuff in a pub for your mates down the, at the bar that night. It was things like a linking finger ring routine and a routine with a hot silver paper, stuff like that, and a version of the $1 Million Mystery, Grant's $1 Million Mystery from Tarbell 3 with boxing gloves where the 2 notes are torn in half. It's amazing how you couldn't do this anymore, because the one trick involved a cigarette. One trick, you had to tear 2 notes in half. You can't do that now with these blooming vinyl notes or whatever. So a lot of the stuff on there was stand-up material. I'm not sure the world was ready for stand-up material in those days, but I hope it sold for him.
You also released a standalone trick, didn't you?
That came out at the same time. Yeah, it was like a thing, a memory stunt. Wallet. Basically, you borrow 3 banknotes from people. They look at the serial numbers, circle one of the digits. They read you out the 3 serial numbers, and you basically remember all 3 numbers. They circle one of the digits on the number, then they read out the rest of the note, but they don't tell you the number they've circled, and you can tell them which number they've circled. And then at the end, you add up the 3 numbers they've circled, and you've got a prediction in the wallet that brings the routine to an end. I love doing that still. I still do that one occasionally. But it frightens people because there's a bit of maths involved.
And I want to talk to you about that. You do a lot of magic on stage, as well as close up. I mean, obviously you're known as a close up magician, but you do a lot of stand up magic. And I've said on this channel, and I've told you off camera as well, I think that when COVID ends and things start to come back to some sort of normality, I think that stand-up magic and stage magic is going to be, at least initially, more in demand than close-up magic, because the very term,
possibly,
yeah. So what advice would you give people that want to put a stage show together? Because the problem, at least I see, I've worked with so many close-up magicians, multi-man close-up gigs, where, and you must have seen this, they're doing the big banquet tables of 10. And there's the room and the massive tables. And they walk up, and the way to deal with the table of 10 is to just do it to 2 people and ignore it.
Yeah.
And whilst I know, because I've worked with you, you and I both do the same thing, you treat it as a cabaret show. It's like, hello. But because a lot of people don't do that, how is somebody going to transition to stage from close up?
Well, the best advice I can give you here is to stop buying rubbish, save up your money, and see if you can find a copy of Stand Up by Ian Keeble, which is a book that Ian wrote. and it's basically a one-stop shop for doing a stand-up act. And that's a 200-page book, you know, and it's just packed with superb advice, you know. So get a copy of that if you can. But then you've got, of course, practically from me, it's that you get your material from, people say, where'd you get your material? A lot of close-up magicians, because they've grown up in the world of close-up, they try to adapt close-up material for the stage. You know? And it very rarely works. So you need to find stand-up material. And there's only one, there's no better source than Tarbell. Now, it's that sort of advice that's so often given and completely ignored by most people. Tarbell was written at a time, the original Tarbell course in magic was written from the 20s onwards. And it went through that Renaissance period for cabaret style magic in the US, nightclub magic, you know, with talking performers, people like Paul Rossini and A. Duval, and their materials all in Tarbell. There's loads and loads of stand-up material in Tarbell just waiting to be rediscovered, you know. So your material's in there, and that, you know, and read a lot really. So try and find your material. And then you've got to learn the rules of stage magic, simple rules. And they're, you know, things like hit them hard to start with. You know, you've got to learn what's an opener, what types of tricks are good for middles. It's a massive, which is the reason I recommend the Keeble book, is it goes into all of this sort of detail, how to use a microphone, how to your closing tricks, you know, don't end with somebody on stage with you, you know, so it's all uncluttered, you can just say goodbye, all that sort of stuff, you know. And it's quite often close-up tricks, close-up magicians don't have an act. They know lots of tricks, and they just bung them to, you know, and they just on a whim they'll pull one out their pocket, they'll do it, and then they'll move on to something else, you know. And it's just really a sort of a pick 5 tricks from 12, you know, type of approach, whereas a stage act needs more discipline.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a lot more to learn. You've got to address a whole room full of people. Tamariz talks about that in the 5 points in magic, you know, how to walk on stage, how we're, you know, you need to read, while a lot of older books don't, you know, this advice, do something at the start that hits them quickly, you know. Well, that doesn't always apply these days, you know. For example, people would open with a vanishing cane or something. Well, that's all very well in a theatre in the 40s where the lights go down and everybody's looking at the stage. But, you know, in a modern, you know, if in a golf club environment where half the people will be at the bar, half the people will be talking to their mates, you know, having a fag from, you know, outside, you're going to, if you start with a quick trick, half of them aren't going to see it anymore, you know. So rules have changed a little bit, but you've got to find out what the rules are these days. And once again, there's nothing like experience, you know. Yeah, there's no short answer to that. I don't think. How do you create? So I would imagine creating a stand-up act is a lot of work. It is a lot of work, you know, and it only improves through repetition, you know.
I spent 3 years on the holiday park circuit. Man, that's unforgiving.
Oh yeah. It's not just about the show; it's the travelling to and from the show, the setting up.
I remember one day going from Torquay Sands. And doing Torquay Sands on the Tuesday, and on the Wednesday I had to be in where was it? Just around about Scotland. It was
would it be up somewhere up in Ayr? There was a holiday camp around here, wasn't there? You know.
Yeah, Craig Tarr in Scotland, and it's literally a 14-hour drive.
Oh yeah,
6 o'clock in the morning to get there to set up. It was yeah.
I was talking to Mark James the other day. You know, Mark's a fabulous entertainer, but he works a lot of holiday camps. God knows what mile he must kill his car. I think he must need a new car every year. You know, it's not an easy way of. It's not. You know, I mean, the thing is you're right there. It's where do you know? Okay, once you've developed your stand-up act, where are you going to work it nowadays? You know, I mean. Cruises I've never done. I mean, I have done a couple of cruises. I did one with Tommy Wonder in the 90s. That was a great time. But you know, I can well believe it. The best theatres in the world now are on ships, aren't they?
They are. Yeah.
You know, And then your other big outlet, I suppose, is holiday camps. And if you're going onto the holiday camp circuit, be prepared to work hard, because you're bloody driving miles on that sort of circuit.
You really are. You really are. And the thing is, though, you can't miss the steps. If you want to be brilliant, you need the experience. You can't go from here to here overnight. No. You have to.
You can't. Of course, that's where close-up's got the advantage, isn't it? Because if you're working in a new routine in close-up around the tables, you'd have done it 12 times after your first night, whereas a stand-up act, you've done it once. Yes. And unless you're, I don't know if you found this, but I found if I didn't, I mean, God knows, after this year off, I don't know about you, but when I get back to working again, I'm going to be rusty as hell.
Yes, I mean, I've been doing a lot of performing on the YouTube channel. I've been putting out 50 videos a week. So I've been, but I think that I've not performed for real people.
No,
I've performed virtually, and I know you've not really done much virtual stuff, but I've performed virtually, and I've performed on YouTube. But there's a world of difference between doing it on virtual, and because at least with my style, and you've seen me perform, so I'm very quick-witted, and I'm very, that I bounce
hit them hard,
and I haven't done that in almost a year now.
No,
because virtually I can't bounce off people because they're all muted.
That's what I don't like about Zoom shows. Like, I understand from people who do them, it's really very off-putting. Getting, doing gags in your living room and not,
it's so difficult.
Really getting the feedback. Yeah,
it's really difficult. You have to. It's almost like. I think the reason I'm good at it is I've died on my arse so many times. It's like dying on your arse. Like when you go and I've done holiday parks off season where there's been 3 people in the audience, and you've got to present the same act to the 3 people. If there was 1,000 people there, and you literally just have to perform it and pretend in your head that people are reacting, and that's kind of a little bit of what you have to do with virtual. You have to just assume that people are enjoying it, and it's not.
There again, it's just the way there's no way around it at the moment, is there? Well, you're tired, mate.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. No, there's no way. There's no way around it. But hopefully, hopefully we're going to we'll come back soon, bigger and better than before.
I mean, comedy clubs were a good. I mean, I don't know much about working comedy, but I many years ago, I've been very friendly now. I was saying before that one of the best things about my career is that I'm quite friendly with a lot of my heroes, as it were, and I know some brilliant cabaret performers. Paul Zenon, I got to know 25 years ago when we did a gig together up in Glen Eagles in the golf course in Scotland.
Paul is astounding.
Paul is a fabulous stand-up act. I don't know how much of he's doing these days. I think he's diversified into acting and things like that nowadays, but he's got a fabulous stand-up comedy club stroke after dinner act, And we were booked together to do Glen Eagles Hotel, where, for a Mitsubishi sales conference, and that's where we got to know him, but he booked me to do close-up magic in the City Hall in London that used to be Ken Livingstone's domain when Ken was London mayor in the 90s, which the big building you could see it over the road from Westminster, over the Westminster Bridge. That was turned into a Salvador Dali museum, where people would go and have a corporate dinner in there, and all, hanging on the walls was Salvador Dali paintings, originals, And I always remember looking at Paul, and Paul does that trick with a snooker triangle and a pint of bitter, and he's swinging this thing around his head, and I'm just thinking, if that pint glass comes off, that's some of these paintings on these walls must be worth millions, And Paul's swinging a pint of beer around this room, like there's no tomorrow, So fair play to him, But I ended up working with Paul on his TV specials as well. I did a bit. Well, that's another thing I suppose we could talk about. Really, I've in the late 90s, Paul asked me. Paul was pitching for years a street magic special.
Well, he pioneered the whole idea of street magic before David Blaine, before Dynamo.
he was pitching it before Blaine and getting nowhere, and because they were saying, well, we like the idea, but and the TV executives, are. Then all of a sudden, David Blaine comes along, does his special, and then all of a sudden, they want the TV special now on Channel 4 because they've seen how successful it can be. So Paul is now able to. So I think Paul sold them, 3. He did a thing called Comedy Lab, which is a short version of it, and I think he did 3 full scale, and I worked on 2 of them, I think.
I remember some of them. I remember him taking the old folding key thing and linking it onto somebody's big ear.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We did all sorts of things like that.
And the tax disc.
That was one of Phil Jay's ideas. Yeah, and the one I particularly liked was let me tell you, the great thing, that's the importance of character as well, isn't it? Paul, it was a joy working with Paul because he had and he's still got this easily definable character. You know exactly what type of character he's playing. He's a Jack the Lad, streetwise, sort of con man, sort of friendly, likable, but you wouldn't trust him as far as you could spit a rap type. And that makes it much easier to come. You could instantly say, is that trick going to work for Paul? Because he wasn't bland, if you see what I mean. Can I diverse? I once saw a Magic Circle close-up competition, and one of the acts came on who eventually won it, and he walked on stage, and I burst out laughing because it was like a parody of a human being walked on the stage. Basically, it was a 200 quid haircut and a Paul Smith suit and a fake tan and veneered teeth and socks regulation, amount of socks showing and everything. And this cartoon character walked on stage and won that. Well, I think he might have won it. So it shows how much I know, doesn't it? But what he'd done was he successfully removed every ounce of character from himself. It was like a tailor's dummy walking on stage and doing magic, as far as I was concerned, which luckily Paul didn't have, No. And so Paul does this. Paul wanted to do this, we did this thing where we stop a traffic warden and Paul said, do you mind if I just film this for you? And basically what he does is this is one of the bits I was involved with. We explain the principles of misdirection to him, and basically he vanishes a coin and says, what we're doing is what the idea being that we distract you while something goes on in the background, and all the time behind this we're clamping the traffic warden's car, and he's using so everything he's doing about the principles of misdirection being distracted by something where something secret's going on behind him. We were actually doing that behind him, and I thought that was excellent, and the original idea for Paul's thing was to do magic with a slight sort of edge to it, where there were victims in the trick, but victims who deserved it. People, universal hate figures. That went out the window to a certain extent, but I'd love to have done more of that. Those people that stop you in the street and ask you to fill out a form. I'd love to do some magic where you make all their pens disappear or something, leave them stuck there in the street. That would work for Paul,
That would be good. And he still, does countdown and stuff now, doesn't he?
Still does countdown. Yeah.
He's just as
he's great. He's a great performer. But that was, I did a few TV consultancy things after that for Paul, I worked with Keith Barry in Ireland on his show. He was the first Irish magician to get a show on TV. And then Dynamo. I did quite a few viral campaigns and things with Dynamo and the Barclay card adverts for Premiership, and then worked on the first 2 series of Dynamo, Mission Impossible. And then I did the Ben Earl series that went out. Ben Earl, trick artist, helped him out a bit on that with Mark. Yeah, Mark Elsden was one of the big guys on that, and did a bit with Drummond Coots, did DMC, just a day or two on that, but that didn't work out very well. So, so I've done a fair bit of TV consultancy over the years as well.
You've done so much.
It's just it's a consequence of getting old, I think.
Could you give anybody any advice? Because one of the things I know about you is you're very, very creative. Outside of the videos and the tricks and the DVDs that you've released, you've also published so many routines in magazines and a whole bunch of different stuff. And I can't imagine the amount of unpublished material you have. What advice would you give a magician who's wanting to be creative and create their own magic? How do they get inspiration? What's the best way? What's your approach when you're wanting to create a magic trick?
I've done a bit. I wouldn't say I've done a huge amount. I've got notebooks and stuff in, but I'm not a massive fan of just filling the world with content. First thing you've got to ask yourself is this worth, is this worth doing? Is what I've created an improvement or a step forward or even an interesting step sideways from something that already exists? We talked about this. I can't remember if it was on or off camera, Paul Craig, but there's so much magic in the world now that I sometimes think it'd be best if we just stepped back and learned to do what's already out there, rather than just continually, come up with. I know that it has to move on, and I'm all for that. Occasionally you will get a genuine step forward in magic, but I'm not utterly convinced by technological magic. I just wonder, all these people that spent 1,500 quid on a pad that that transmits what's being written on it to an iPhone. I'm sure that's going to be commonplace tomorrow. That there's going to be it might even be out there now.
The bottom line is we stand on the shoulders of giants, and all of these people that are looking for the next. I think that people buy the latest trick because they're looking for that trick that's going to make them famous, and they don't realize that
that's always been the case. I think
it's not one trick that makes you famous. You become famous by putting yourself into it. I am sitting behind a bookcase, and on this bookcase, I have the pride of my collection, which is. I'll show it you. It's there's tons of them. There's millions of them. So let me just grab one of them at random. There's 4 shelves worth. What I have here is every single abracadabra from the very first one to the very last one.
Right, every issue, fabulous.
Every single issue from the very first one to the very last one. I'm here at the bottom of my garden in my office. And I will most nights I'll come down here and I'll be like, right, let's look at 1949, 18th of June. And there's stuff in here that I could literally take from here and release as a download, and people would go crazy for it.
People wouldn't know, would they? No, I know. No, I know. It's Abra's fabulous, and of course, in its day, it was one of the places where you'd find really. Elmsley published a lot of stuff in Abra, in the 50s. And I remember corresponding with Paul Daniels about something in Abra I'd discovered. It was his, the Alan Shatson note in walnut, in egg, in orange trick that Daniels used to do brilliantly. A note disappears.
Yes.
And then a walnut disappears and an egg disappears, and you peel the orange and the eggs in the orange and they crack the egg and the walnuts in the egg, and then the notes in the, there's a lovely idea in the summer special, I think from 1946 from Abra that I remember coming across in the Magic Circle Library and corresponding with Paul Daniels about it. I saying, did you see, this? It was a really nice idea about having the walnut temporarily attached to the bowl of a spoon, so that when you crack the egg into the glass, you could reach in with the spoon, holding the back of the spoon to the audience, and as you scooped up apparently the spoon, the walnut came into view, which you just detached from the bowl, and so it was never in the egg. But it's a brilliant idea from 1946. The summer special now, I think it was 1946 or 47. Abra, but there's some great stuff in Abra. I love old magic magazines.
Yeah, but I think that's me too, and I think. I've just signed up to the Genie magazine because I did access. I realised that if I sign up to Genie, I get access to every Genie and every magic magazine that was ever written. I'm like, that's brilliant.
I read that as well.
More people should read. I do think. I know you're a big advocate of books, and I completely agree with you. I think that more people should be reading more books. But
I think people say they're not book learners. I just sometimes wonder if they, once again, I used to poo-poo that, but perhaps we are now living in a society where, technology's taken over a bit, but I think it's a big shame, because I think I've got nearly 2,000 books in my collection, and gathered up over 40 years, you know, and it's like having a one-stop shop. If anything I want to know about anything, you know, I've got reasonably good memory for where things are. And it's great to have this resource just sitting there, you know. I don't need to fire it up or plug it in. They're all just sitting there ready to pull off the shelf.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know, and sit and have a cup of coffee and read it, you know. Yeah, I'm a big fan of books. Yeah.
Well, before we wrap this whole interview up, I want to ask you one question, which is, what's next for you? Because obviously you've had an amazing career.
Yeah.
You've been a professional most of your life. You've done sort of gigs. You've traveled the world, performing on stages, performing close up. You've had the sort of career that most magicians would dream of. You're also very, very respected in the magic world. You know, you talk about all of the friends that you have in magic. You know, just name dropping people like, oh yeah, Dave Williams. You've done so much. What's next? Because I would love to see you do more releases, and specifically I'd love to see you write your own book.
Yeah, that's something that's been on the cards for years. I keep meaning to do that, and people have asked me to do it, you know. I wish I knew, to be honest, Craig. This COVID thing has thrown the whole world into total chaos, hasn't it? You know, and I genuinely haven't got any predictions as to what. I've got no idea what's going to happen. You know, I don't think this COVID thing's not going to be over one day and we'll all snap our fingers and go back to what it was before. I think it's going to be a slow build, you know, and close-up magic's a young man's game, I suppose, these days, and I'm getting older. So I think that's the irony of it, isn't it, really? You know, that, you know, as you lose perhaps a bit of your dexterity because you're getting a bit older, what you gain on the other hand is experience. And I know I can go into a room, and if I'm on form, and I don't normally like to big myself up, but if I'm on form, I can absolutely storm a room.
I've seen you many, many times.
And it's ironic that you get better as you get older, and yet, you know, it seems as though people want youth. You know, I don't blame them. It's me being bitter and twisted, I suppose, you know, but it's funny that I think you get better as you get older.
I agree.
So I think you've got to find so for me, I suppose it's finding the audience, really. You know, I mean, I'm very happy. I love working in multi-man jobs, but I've noticed I'm the guy with the grey hair, you know, these days, you know, and I'm working with other 20-somethings, you know, or 30-somethings. And I think that's fine, you know. I think the thing is not to be, what I've got, I think, is I'm not bland. Whatever you think of me, I'm not bland.
Not at
all. I think, and I'm going to be slightly critical here, there's some people that band into groups, 4 or 5 magicians will go out, and they could almost swap each other's material, and nobody would notice because they all perform in exactly the same sort of way, you know. Mm-hmm. Whereas I've worked in teams, and one of us, you know, I used to say this to one of the jobs that I think we worked with you on, it was, I still do, I work with Max Butler, who's not a full-time magician, but he's better than most full-time magicians. He's the handsome one. There was you know, I'd work with him and Will Gray, you know, and there'd be 3 of us, and Jason would be the handsome one, and all the women, because he's a good-looking lad, you know, all the women would swoon over him, you know. Will would be Mr. Hey, let's have a party, you know, you're sort of traditional, you know, let's all have some fun. And I'd be Mr. Grumpy, you know, I'd be sort of slightly, you know, right, do what I'm telling you, know, sort of, but hopefully in a comedic way.
Yeah.
You know, but I like to think that none of us could have swapped each other's material because we all had 3 distinct. So if we ever had to do 2 tables, you know, sometimes you know, they book 3 magicians and they'd say, well, you do that table. Right, we've done it. Well, you better do that one now. And that, if whoever went back to the table followed the audience, were getting something different. You know?
I completely agree. And that's the problem these days, without being funny and without insulting anyone who's watching this. So many magicians are cookie cutters. They are just exactly the same. It's almost like a little factory puts them out, and they do the same material because they buy the lightest shiny trick. There's no deviation in it, and they haven't found their character, and they have no interest in
That's the thing. It's finding your character, really, isn't it? It's finding, you know, I mean, most people most people say that your character is an exaggerated version of you. You know, and I suppose that to a certain extent, actually, you know, if you want to try and find a character, exaggerate. If you're, I mean, one of the I used to do for many years the Lord's Taverners charity cricket dues on the island of Sark in the Channel Islands. It was a great. Tim Rice would go, and half the cast from EastEnders would go. And we'd all stay in a hotel, and I'd do the magic, and they would just go there and be celebrities, you know. So Richard Stilgoe did his act one night, and we had David Essex and Colin Salmon, who's an excellent actor in the Bond films. And I remember one day, I'm having breakfast, and I'm at the table with Wendy Richard. Do you remember Wendy Richard from EastEnders? You know.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Pauline Fowler, and she was and she had a Cockney accent, you know. And she'd say to me, I remember one morning she said to me, "I like you, Dave. I like watching you do magic." And I said, "Oh, that's very nice of you, Wendy. What is it about that?" She said an interesting thing. She said, "Because after you finished, she said, I think I know more about you than I knew at the start, you know." And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I thought, well, where has she got that impression from? And I think it stemmed from Williamson. Williamson used to say, and still does, when you go and perform, don't be Mr. Perfect. You know, hey, you know, Mr. Slick, do your stuff slickly, you know, try and show a bit of your human side. You know, he would do one routine, and as he was producing the coins, he'd hit himself too hard and he'd hurt his arm or something like that, you know, a bit of conflict there. And as he's trying to open a pack of cards, the cellophane from the cards would stick to his fingers, and he'd eventually stick it up his arse to get rid of it, you know, stuff like that, you know. And it was brilliant. But he's a brilliant clown, you know, and I can't do that sort of stuff. So I thought, well, how can I put this conflict into my act? And I had this idea one day that I'd just be honest with them, and I'd say, if my back was hurting, I'd say, "Oh God, my back's hurting," you know, something like that. But then I'd try and incorporate whatever it was, you know, into my act, you know, or something like that, you know. And I think, and it sort of breaks that fourth wall. And that was my way of putting conflict in the act. I wasn't trying to be Mr. Perfect. If anything had gone wrong, or I'd got a headache, or something had gone missing, or a bit of the deck had gone missing, I would not try and be Mr. Slick. I'd try and incorporate that into my performance, as it were. And I think that's what she interpreted as, you know, she might have known a bit more about me, but what she knew was I had a bad back that day, or my shoes didn't fit properly, or I'd broken a shoelace, or something like that, you know. I think that's what it was. And I think it was an interesting thing that this actress, because it's easy to think that people who work in soaps and comedies are just don't take that out, but she's a very serious actress. I think, you know, she liked this vulnerability, I suppose, this thing where you're being honest with people. And I think that's a good thing to try and cultivate. Don't try and be Mr. Slick, you know. Try and show you that you're one of them. You know,
I think that's really, really important. I really do. Yeah. I think that some magicians hide behind the magic.
Yeah,
you know, and fair enough if you do that, that's fair enough. But I think, look at the best magicians that have ever lived. They've always been more than just the magic. Do you know? That's
and the most successful.
Yeah.
So you look at Dynamo. You see now, one of the reasons I ended up working with Dynamo was, I don't know if you were around at the time, but Dynamo. I was first aware of Dynamo. When would it have been? Probably late 90s, early 2000, 2001. He would come to conventions as a young teenager, perhaps 14, 15 years old.
I remember him, and
you couldn't stop him doing magic. He'd do magic for everyone at the drop of a hat, and he would do this, combining this hip hop dancing with magic. And JJ from Opus magazine used to knock about with it, like, you know, we sort of took a bit of a shine to him, you know, we liked him, and because people would sort of diss him a little bit, you know, because he was doing something a little bit different. But we all sort of liked it. And I liked his attitude, and I liked him as a person. you know. And he once said to me, and he went from McDonald's in Blackpool one year, and he said, if ever I get my own TV special, I'm going to get you in as an advisor. And you know what he did? He kept his promise. And you know what the secret to Dynamo's success is? And it's the secret, and I think Ian Keeble once again mentioned this. People in this country especially, it's not good enough to be a good magician. If you want to be a star, they've got to like you. And they love Dynamo. They love him. They like him as a person.
Yeah.
Because he's easy to like. I don't know if you've seen him with his fans.
Yeah.
You know, he'll sign anything, and he'll take selfies for everyone. And he's just got this, you know, and his advert he does on TV where he's in the warehouse and the woman sends him up for the Yorkshire tea. Is it for the tea? I can't remember what it's for now, but and he just comes across as incredibly likable.
He does.
And he's still the same, you know, he's doing very well for himself, and he's still the same Dynamo I knew as a 13, 14-year-old lad, you know, and Paul Zenon's the same, and Williamson's the same.
Dynamo and Paul Zenon are two examples of people that have not changed. Fame hasn't changed them. They're the same, you know, than they were.
Yeah. Well, the public like them. I think they like that. I think they like. So then they're not hiding behind their magic. They show a bit of their personality.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they do so well. I think, you know, don't hide behind the magic. You know.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, all the best magicians like that. You know, I think they can respect you. Ron McMillan had it. You know, there's a lot of respected magicians. I've been to the funerals of quite a few respected magicians, and the talk has been, oh, he was great at this and he's great at that. But when I went to Ron's funeral, they loved Ron. That was the difference.
Yeah.
You know, and it's an indefinable. It's hard to define why it is, but it's, you know. I think if you can try and cultivate that, you'll do. That's the biggest advice I reckon. You know, if we're going to wrap this up, I say the biggest advice if you're going to perform for real people is just be likable. Don't be a dick.
Yeah.
You know, that will do much more than anything, I think, to get you somewhere.
I've always said on this channel, I've said it before, the best magic book that you can buy is not a magic book. It's something like How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah. Well, if that helps, yeah. But I mean, I just think just don't be a dick, I suppose, you know. It's that thing again, and if you want to improve your act, cut out all the bad bits. If you want to be likable, don't be a dick. You don't have to practice being likable. You just have to cut out the bits where you're being a dick.
Oh, that's great. I think I've just found the title for this episode. Dave Jones, don't be a dick.
Yes. It sounds like you're telling me off.
That is great. That is fantastic. That is awesome advice, and it's true. It is true. We are going to wrap it up, but before we do, I would be remiss to ask you one last question. You've said you've got a collection of over 2,000 magic books.
Oh God, yeah.
You're very well read.
Yeah.
What is the best magic book that you've ever read?
Impossible to answer. I'll tell you what, the best one I've read in the last 20 years. That's easier, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you can get a copy, it's Roy Benson by Starlight. By Levent.
Got a copy over there.
Yeah, it's to me the perfect magic book. He was a brilliant performer. Different styles. The magic in there is, I mean, Levent is brilliant, and anything with Levent's name on it, you should be buying or watching. I think, you know, he's done a series of DVDs.
I've got
classics.
Yeah, my salt pour routine.
Yeah.
Just Levents.
Yeah.
I open
the instructions are great, aren't they, Craig, on that? Yeah. Because it's not just how to do the trick. He goes into the history of it. He goes into the design of the gimmick, how he's changed it. He's done the half-dyed silk like that. He's done a complete set of on the Miser's Dream, which is a trick I've used for years in my kids' show. He's done one on the Lincoln Rings. He's done one on billiard balls, 7 or 8, and everything with Levent's name, and it's brilliant. But that is his crowning achievement, the Roy Benson by Starlight. That's a brilliant book. But I mean, it's impossible to one, but Tarbell is superb. Stars of Magic is superb. And then if you want to get more modern, you know, anything with Jerry Sadowitz's name on it is fabulous, the best card magician in Britain, in my opinion.
I would agree with you 100%.
So, but when you say modern, he probably hasn't written a book for 20 years yet, have they? Yeah.
Oh, well,
Print,
you talk about
magic
books. Vanishing Ink are doing a great job.
They're doing
keeping the book market alive.
They are, yeah. I mean, with me, I'm more interested in their older stuff. I mean, I'm getting like that now. I think you're asking about new tricks and stuff, but I'll leave that to the young kids. I like to see classics done brilliantly. I like to see. I'd much rather see somebody do the egg bag brilliantly than some sort of strange new thing where they're trying to. Yeah, I can see why they're trying to do it, but but that's just me.
Well, they're classics for a reason,
Yeah.
And you always see a new version of it. Everything like the best. I was introduced recently to the best version of the egg bag I've ever seen, and it was by Curtis Cam, the coin guy.
Oh right, yeah. I'm a big fan of the egg bag, and
well, he had this wonderful egg bag.
Look at this. See that? Cap's scrapbook. There's 2 routines in there.
Right.
It's an old book to compile a magazine, but there's 2 routines in there. One where it's from the 40s, and there's one where you do an egg bag routine, and at the end you hand the bag out to be examined, and it's got a drink finish and everything. So that's one of the things. Books like this are a secret. If you want stand-up material, try and find the copy of that. Paul Daniels' routine with the funnel came out of there. With the pump in the arm and the milk coming out the funnel. Paul Zenon's routine with the cigarette and the knife through coat. It's not exactly how Paul done it, but that's where it's come from. A combined cigarette, knife through coat, stuff like that. So yeah,
it's so
some brilliant. I mean, I love magic books. I'm just looking up at my shelf now, and I'm just seeing thousands of anything with Hugh Gordon Browie on it. I love their stuff. I've got the Phoenix books. The Bruce Elliott classic Secrets of Magic that was basically bits of the Phoenix magazine put into books and sold to the public. There's so many good things. Depends what you want, really.
That's it. There's so many different options.
That's the good thing about having a library. It's there where people say, have you read them all? And I think I have to think. So, well, I would imagine I've read huge amounts of them. But the thing about building a library is it's there for when you need it. That's the thing. One day you're going to say, I need something with this, and then you go, oh, it's in there. And it's there ready at hand then. And the other thing, if you want to be mercenary, books seem to accumulate in value much more than any other. You won't be, if you really want an investment, like that Ian Keeble book, I think it was 25 quid when it came out. You're gonna have to pay 80 quid or 90 quid if you want it now, because it's, so they're a good investment as well. If you want any other reason.
Like to say, you don't have to power it up to watch it.
Exactly. It's there ready to go. Yeah.
Dave.
Yeah. Cheers, Craig.
Mate, you have been absolutely.
I
remember what I said at the beginning. You're somebody who I massively respect. I wanted to do the channel very early on.
Great.
And I really hope, because you've not released material for a long time. I really hope that you.
I think I'd like to write the book. I think, before I eventually.
Your magnus opus. I'd really like to see your book. I really would, and I hope one day you make that happen.
Good, yeah. Lazy me, but I'm going to try and get it done. Yeah. Good luck with your podcast. This isn't a podcast, though, is it? This is Magic TV.
But it goes on a podcast as well. But we're mainly on YouTube here. But thanks, mate. Really appreciate it. And guys, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to. Keep up to date with what we're doing. 15 videos every single week. And I'll be back tomorrow with another video in a Magic Live at 6 o'clock. I'll see you again. My name's Craig from Magic TV. Dave, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye.